All right. That out of the way, we're in 2 Samuel chapter 11. I mentioned we're going to look at tonight the life of David especially and what we learn about grace through his. Specifically, we're going to look at the latter half of his life. That may not come as a huge surprise to you. 2 Samuel chapter 11 is, well, it's famous for being what story? David and Bathsheba. If there's one place that David is known for failing, it's right here. This is the big oops for David. And from this point forward, his life is radically different. One thing I do want to note, this is of course after he has been king. It's also after 2 Samuel chapter 7, where he receives that great and awesome promise from God about having a kingdom forever. And so it is after all of that that this occurs and that David has this great fall. Now let's get right into it. Chapter 11, somebody read verses 1 through 5. 1 through 5. Okay, so what time of year is it? It's the spring. And what is important about that it mentions? Time of war? Yeah. Specifically when who goes to battle? Kings go out to battle. What is David known for? We talked about it some Sunday night when we talked about Lion of Judah. What is David known for being? A man of war. So, of course, David's going to go out with his people, right? Well, he should. He should have. And yet, he stays in Jerusalem. Somebody tell me, what city are they besieging? No, he stays at Jerusalem. What city are they besieging? Because Joab and the army go out. Where do they go? Rabbah. Yeah, Rabbah, however you want to pronounce it. They go to Rabbah. That's going to be important later. And what happens? David stays back, and what happens? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he sees Bathsheba, and she's bathing because she is purifying herself, it tells us later. And David goes and takes her and commits adultery with her. And what happens as a result of that? She becomes pregnant. Oh no. What's David's response? Somebody read verses 6 through 13. Yeah.
So David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was doing and how the people were doing and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out, left his house, and there followed him a present from the king. went out to lie on his couch with the servants of the Lord, but he did not go down to his house.
Okay, so what's David's solution to the problem? Exactly. And so what does that accomplish? Yeah, it covers up the issue, which is a problem, not as bad as what he does next, but it is still an issue. What is important about Uriah? Uriah is the Hittite. What else do we know about him? And this comes from places outside of here. He's something special to David. He's one of his mighty men. Yeah. He's one of David's mighty men of valor. His name is mentioned specifically there in Chronicles and a couple other places. So this is one of David's men who's been with him a long time, before he was king. And David knew this from before the original sin happened. He's making it worse now. And then, we're not going to read it, but what is David's next solution? Since he can't get Uriah to go to his house, what's David's final solution going to be? Put him in the front of the battle so that what happens? So that he is killed. Which is effectively what? Murder. Yeah. Indirectly maybe, but it is still at the end of the day murder. And so, Uriah is killed. And does David seem to feel any remorse about that whatsoever in the moment? Right here in chapter 11, is there anything to indicate anything, moment of sorrow on David's part? No, there's really not. What happened? Somebody read 26 and 27. Okay, so there's a whole lot of things we could talk about with this chapter, with this story. Most of them we're not trying to talk about tonight. Tonight what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at how David's life makes us understand grace better. And so the one big thing we need to get out of this is that this is really bad. There's really beyond no question that this is probably the worst thing that David has done over the course of his life, at least to this date, if not over his entire life. This is a really, really big fall for David. And he doesn't even seem to have a problem with it at first. And yet, what do we know about the rest of David's life? Does anything change after his life about how God refers to him? How is he known for the rest of the Bible? A man after God's own heart. He's known as that before this story, and he's known about that after this story. Is it because this entire thing just kind of never came to light? Well, no. Chapter 12, what happens? Yeah, Nathan comes to him and gives him the story. What happens at the end of the story that he gives to him? Verse 5 and 6.
David is outraged at the story, the parable.
Yeah.
About the man with the one little lamb that his wealthy neighbor took and presented as a feast.
Exactly, yeah. And so what is the judgment that David passes upon this? This man deserves to die. In addition to restoring the lamb fourfold. And Nathan's response? Yeah, you're that man. This isn't something that actually happened that I'm telling you about so that you could go do something about it. This is you. You just did this. And what is David's response? Yeah, verse 13, I have sinned against the Lord. So his response is, I've sinned. He realizes he's messed up. He knows it's an issue. And this isn't just an acknowledgement. What's interesting to me always is that Nathan's response is very different than Samuel's response to Saul when Saul utters this exact same thing. What is Nathan's response to David? Verse 14. Or end of 13 and 14. Okay, so a consequence is given, but Nathan says what? What is God doing with your sin? He has forgiven it. He's put it away. Right there, that shows us grace off the bat, right? But you look at it, God's pronounced a great judgment. If you were to read 7 through 12, there is an incredible judgment that has been passed against David, and we're going to look at that for the rest of the night. We're going to look at the ongoing consequences of this action. And yet, David's sin is forgiven. There's still consequences to be had for it, but his sin has been forgiven. But what is the consequence? Immediately speaking, what is the immediate consequence? That child is going to die. That specific one is going to die. We see that happen in the rest of chapter 12. But while that is going on, while the child is sick, what's David's response to that? Mourning and weeping. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're looking for in this case. You're right, mourning and weeping. But to the end that he is seeking grace from the Lord. Why? The Lord pronounced judgment. He said it was going to happen. So why does David seek grace at this point? Yeah. Because he knows that maybe the Lord will. Yeah. In this case, the Lord does not change his mind. The Lord does not relent from this. And so, verse 22, David explaining his reasoning. Somebody read 22 and 23. Who knows whether the Lord will be, what? Gracious to me, that the child may live. But since he is not, there is no point in further mourning it, because it's not going to do anything. He can't come back to me. But he does mention what? Which is a really interesting thing. I will go to him, but he shall not return to me. That is a fascinating statement of faith. Why? Why specifically in this context is that such an incredible statement of faith? What does this child's death represent to David? His sin. This is the consequence of his sin, and yet his statement is, I shall go to him, but he will not return to me. Yes? Correct, yes. Yes, yeah, absolutely. That is absolutely correct. Thank you. Yeah, and Nathan specifically mentions that when he says, you shall not die, the Lord has put away your sin. The reason David would die is because he has committed adultery. But moving forward, what is the penalty long term for David? It comes from verse 11 and 12 of chapter 12. What is the long-term penalty for David going to be? Disorder in his house. Yeah, and specifically what regarding that? Yeah, because you did it secretly, but I will do this before all Israel. Really interesting, because where's the fulfillment of that? Yeah, Absalom is the one who does that. But right here, God declares who's the one who actually is causing that to happen. David's sin. It's the consequence of David's sin. Exactly. And yet, that is far less than David deserved. He should have died. Bathsheba should have died. The child, of course, would have died in the process. And yet the only one who dies in the moment is the child itself. But what goes on from there? Verses 24 and 25, what happens? This is, I think, one of the greatest signs of grace in this story. Chapter 12, verses 24 and 25. Somebody read them. Okay, so David has another son with Bathsheba. And what? What is the Lord's response to that? The Lord loves that child. It's a really odd comment for it to make, unless it's trying to point out that God is pointing something out to David. You see where I'm getting at with that? God's message to David is that he is ready to move forward. And with Solomon specifically, what is going to happen? Solomon is the fulfillment of what?
Solomon builds the temple, which David really, really wanted to do himself, which he did in preparation to help Solomon with construction. But Solomon gets to build the temple.
Yes, exactly. And where is the promise that Solomon's going to build a temple found? Just a few chapters earlier. Chapter 7. 2 Samuel chapter 7, with the great promise, we focus on the part of the promise that is, your kingdom shall be sure forever, and the fact that it's pointing to Jesus, but it's pointing to Solomon in the immediate fulfillment. It's talking about Solomon, even though Solomon's not born yet at that point. And this is that here. God goes to David and says, my promises are still counting. They're still there. I made them, and they're going to be fulfilled, despite what you've done. Despite the fact that Bathsheba is your wife, Bathsheba should not be David's wife. But despite that, God has forgiven and is moving forward. Do you see that? You see how cool that is? This entire thing from this point forward, God is reminding David that he has accepted his forgiveness, or his repentance, sorry. What goes on from there is, somebody read 26 through 31. Chapter 12, verses 26 through 31. We're going to see another example of grace.
Now Joab fought against Rabbah of the Ammonites and took the royal city. And Joab sent messengers to David and said, I have fought against Rabbah. Moreover, I have taken the city with waters. Now then, gather the rest of the people together and encamp against the city and take it, lest I take the city and it be called by my name. So David gathered all the people together and went to Rabbah and fought against it and took it. And he took the crown of the king from his head. The weight of it was a talent of gold. In it was a precious stone, and it was placed on David's head. And he brought out the spoil of the city, a very great amount. And he brought out the people who were in it and set them to labor with saws and iron picks and iron axes, and made them toil at the brick kiln. And thus he did to all the cities of the Ammonites. Then David and all the people returned to Jerusalem.
Okay, so these few verses, this story here, feels a little out of place at first when you just read it immediately following chapter 12. If you read it, then it kind of feels a little bit out of place. But what's the city that Joab is fighting against? It's the city of Rabbah again, except it's not again. This is the city that David and his people, even if David wasn't there, was actively fighting against. David is still a successful warrior. God continues to bless David with successful conquests, despite what happened. That's the military campaign they were actively on is still successful, despite everything that has just happened. In fact, it's incredibly successful. And it goes to great details to mention that. One of the biggest ones that stands out is that he takes the crown of Rabbah's king from his head. And it was a really nice crown. God is still blessing David, just as much as he was before. Do you see that? Thoughts and comments before we move forward from here? Yeah. Yep, absolutely. That's a talent of gold is a lot of gold. Absolutely. Yeah, about 75 pounds of gold. Yep. That's a lot of gold. Other thoughts and comments? All right, we'll move on to chapter 13. This is the beginning of what part of the consequence for David? Yeah, so this is Amnon's sin against Tamar. The discord within David's house. Yeah. What begins to happen to David's family now? It starts to fall apart. Specifically here, we're not going to take the time to read it. We don't have the time to read the story. What happens with Amnon and Tamar? Amnon seduces his half-sister. He does, yes. But with what level of success does he seduce her? He fails. True, yeah. But Amnon does not seduce Tamar. Amnon rapes Tamar, which is why Absalom is so mad. So, yeah, I mean, if you can think of a bigger problem to have, honestly, this probably is the biggest issue in David's family, even above his sons trying to overthrow him. Because from here, everything else falls apart from this point. You already mentioned Absalom. Why is Absalom involved in the story between Amnon and Tamar? Yeah, Tamar is his sister. And so, verses 20, somebody read chapter 13, verses 20 through 22. Because Absalom hated Amnon. What's David's reaction to this? He was angry. Anything else? Yeah, exactly. Nothing. He was very angry. That's all it specifically says. My Bible has a footnote that the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint add that he would not punish Amnon because he was his firstborn. That's textual evidence. Whether or not that is directly inspired, that is what the Jews believed to be the case, because it is what is written in their records. But regardless, he does nothing. For whatever reason, he does nothing. There's all sorts of reasons people have come up with. One, that he's his firstborn, like we see there. Another, that he sees in Amnon himself, because it's a very similar sin. For whatever reason, though, David is angry and does nothing about it. He does not punish Amnon, and so who takes it into his own hands to punish Amnon? Absalom does. In what way? He kills him. He murders him. Yes, incredibly premeditated murder. Yeah, because he's planning it for a long time. Yeah. So in a story very similar to David's, except that it is all of his kids doing it to each other. And yet, what is David's response to Absalom's actions? This is verses 34 through 39. Absalom flees, verse 34. David learns about it, verse 36. Again, verse 37, Absalom flees. And what is David's response, verse 39? Somebody read 39. Somebody who hasn't read yet. And the spirit of David longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. Does that strike you as odd or strange? Because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense immediately to me. He seems to not have an issue with Absalom's actions because he knows that it's kind of what's right, maybe. It's not entirely clear. But at the end of the day, what is David's reaction to Absalom? What action does he take against Absalom's sin? Don't overthink the answer. Yeah, he mourns for it, but does he take any direct action against Absalom? No. He doesn't do anything about it. Again. Absalom's kind of solved his problem. Created another one in the process. Now he has a son who's a murderer instead of a son who is a rapist. But, yeah, exactly, yes. I think that's certainly a major part of this. Yeah, absolutely. But at the end of the day, what happens? What do we know happens further? Not Joab. Absalom is brought back to Jerusalem. And what does Absalom do? Yep, he influences the people. To what end? To what result? Yeah, he's usurping his father. Which, what is the culmination of this? This comes chapter 15. Yeah, he stages a coup. And it's right there, here we go. And David has to do what as a result of it? He has to flee. So this is not some small minor thing. David is effectively removed from his kingship. Everything's going pretty badly for David, right? So why would we be talking about this when we're trying to talk about grace? What happens next for David? He flees, yes, but okay, absolutely. His people stay with him. His people stay loyal to him. And where is his trust? His trust is in God. What happens when the people try to bring the ark of God with him when he's fleeing? This comes from chapter 15, verses 25. What's David's answer? 25 and 26. Somebody read that, who hasn't read yet. Yep. Why? Because that's where it belongs. And what in verse 25, carrying on with his statement, if what? If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see it again, both it and his dwelling place. So he still has faith in God. And what do we know ends up happening? Speeding through the story quickly, Absalom and David meet in war, and the result is Absalom is killed against David's wishes, but still, Absalom is killed, the uprising fails, and David returns to Jerusalem. God continues to be gracious to David, despite the fact that he has to face all of these consequences for his sin. Throughout all of this, what is David's reaction to himself, seemingly? It's similar to a reaction we've been talking about quite a lot as we look through the grace classes and we go through our workbook. How does David seem to feel about himself? A lot of this is somewhat speculation based on what he says and how he treats his position. Is he quite the leader he used to be? I see some shaking of heads. No. Why would you say that? Yeah. How does David feel about his sin? We know he's remorseful. We know that he has repented. God has forgiven him. Has David forgiven himself? It almost feels like he hasn't. It's not explicitly clear that that's the case, but it certainly feels like that. He seems unable, he seems crippled in his ability to do things about others' sins. What happened before this when people would sin and come to him about it? For example, when somebody said that they had been responsible for killing Saul. What happened to that man? He killed him. What happened to people who sinned when David was around? Or people who wanted to do something that was wrong? When they wanted to kill Saul, what's David's reaction to the people around him? It's to lead them in what way? Or in whose way? The Lord's way, yeah. He's leading them in God's way. He seems to have lost that edge now. And yet, moving forward, he has another revolt in chapter 20. Not Shimei. Another S. Sheba revolts against him. Shimei is another one. Sheba revolts against him. And God brings him through that one. And then in chapter 24, David does something else that is well known. His census. Yeah. Somebody briefly describe for me what happens there. What does David want to do? He just kind of out of the blue decides. Let's count the people. Let's count the people, specifically his warriors. How big is my army? Is this just a totally normal census that there's no ulterior motive to whatsoever at all? No. The Bible makes it fairly clear that this is something done out of pride. This is something that is wrong. Not only because it's explicitly commanded, don't do this, do not number the people, but because he's doing it out of pride. And who tries to stop him? Somebody read verse 3. Somebody who you would least expect to stop David. Joab. Yeah. For what reason? Somebody read verse 3. He's like, who cares how many people that the Lord multiplies in your army? Why would you want to know this? The implication being, God is with you. Why would it matter? And yet, David does it anyway. What's different this time, verse 10, after he does it? What happens after his sin? True, not yet, though. Verse 10, what? His heart condemned him. Yeah, my version says struck him, but I like condemned him. David's reaction is, in your own words, that what? Yeah, he has sinned greatly. He knows that what he did was wrong. There's no question about it. And what is his reaction then at the very end of verse 10? What is his plea? Take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done foolishly. What's God's answer to him? Yeah. What are the three options? Where's one? Yep. Okay. Yeah. Yep. 7 or 3 years of famine. The Chronicles and Samuel disagree on that. 3 months before your foes while they pursue you, or 3 days of pestilence. Verse 14, what is David's answer? He leaves it up to the Lord. So after all of this has happened, all of the issues that he's had, David's response is still what? He leaves it in the hands of the Lord for what reason? For his mercy is great. Yeah. And while it is unclear whether David is directly saying, let the Lord choose, he is declining the right to choose, that's a possible reading of this, or he's choosing the 3 days of pestilence, since that comes directly from the Lord, is either translation works. Either way, what happens is the pestilence. And what happens during the pestilence? How many people die? Verse 15? 70,000. Yeah, 70,000 men. So who is the pestilence targeting? The men, which would be what? His warriors. What's David's response? Verse 17. When he sees that happening. Somebody read David's response. Somebody who hasn't read yet. Verse 17.
Then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel who was striking these people and said, surely I have sinned, and I have done wickedly. But these sheep, what have they done? Let your sin, I pray, be against me and against my father's house.
And the Lord's response in verse 16, when he sees what is happening, which comes before David's statement, is, it is enough. Now stay your hand. And the rest of the story, David builds an altar and offers sacrifices. He buys the land, which is where the temple ends up being. But God sees it, and God said, 3 days of pestilence. But what happens? God stops it. Why? Grace and mercy. It is enough. Stay your hand. To be honest, they deserved a lot worse. David certainly deserved a lot worse. And yet, God knew what? What did God know about this situation? About David? Specifically? Okay, yeah. David is some specific thing about his sin. David feels remorse. He is repentant. And so God chooses in this situation to provide the word we've been studying, grace. David's entire second half of his life is a disaster entirely of his own making. And God supports him through all of it, repeatedly continuing to show him grace, to show him mercy, especially following Bathsheba. That was something I really loved about that study, about this week, looking at that, was realizing how many of those seemingly random, just continuations of the story, actually are God's grace. They are God going to David and saying, I'm still fulfilling my promises. I'm still going to keep leading you through your life. It's a really awesome thing to me. Hopefully it's helpful to you guys as well. Thoughts and comments through that. Yeah. Yep, exactly. Which is transition then to as we conclude, what's the point then for us? Because I suspect that we're not going to have a problem with not going to war when the kings are supposed to go to war, or numbering the people. So what's the point then for us? How do we apply this to ourselves? Yeah, Brad.
To me, it's always that no matter what, we always turn back to God. When we sin and we fall and we beat ourselves up, we always turn back to God. Just like David, it was better for him to be punished by God than to take his chances without him.
Mm-hmm.
I think that holds true for us.
Absolutely.
In every way.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah.
You can see how God is a forgiving God, because when they go all the way to the New Testament, Matthew 1, we know that Joseph, the husband of Mary, the mother of Jesus, his lineage comes from Solomon, and it says he's from David and the wife of Uriah.
Mm-hmm.
So Joseph goes all the way into the New Testament as a lineage from David and Uriah's wife Mary.
Yeah. I find that's really interesting. You've got 4 women who are mentioned in Matthew's genealogy, and one of them is the wife of Uriah. Doesn't say Bathsheba, it says the wife of Uriah, the Hittite. Yeah. But yes, you see God's forgiveness because that promise is the fulfillment of 2 Samuel 7. That's the continuation of God's promise to David. Yes.
Looking through all of this, to me, I think David's life is evidence that grace is not through past. There's still consequences.
Yeah, it is a perfect example of that. David's a fantastic example of grace in that way, in part because of all the people who would have deserved to die after that sin, it would be David, because he should have known better. Of all the people to commit that terrible sin, David's the one you would least expect because he's the man after God's own heart, and as a result, you would think he deserves the greatest punishment. It's a huge, great fall, and yet God is merciful to him. Yeah.
I think many times maybe others struggle with this too. You realize that God provides grace for us. It's clear, it's evident. But sometimes you get forgiveness and you look for everything to be okay, everything to go away, just be just right. And the thing is, grace comes as a gift that we got to be thankful for. We can't underestimate the fact that there may be hard days that come. It's not because God didn't give us enough grace. It's because of the actions that we understand.
Yeah.
You got to be comfortable with that. You got to be able to sit with that. David, I think, was able to do that. And it did. It offered the life after life and so away. And, he could have very easily gone, further right than he did as far as feeling sorry for himself and shame and any number of things that had to be very difficult. But I think for us, understanding grace is a gift and be thankful for that. At the same time, we may have one day.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We're out of time. Todd, do you have anything you want them to do for Sunday? Just read the next chapter. Yep. Read chapter 4 for Sunday. Todd's going to be teaching, in part because I won't be here. So, thank you all for a good class.